can feel my body cold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, look at me deceiving, let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. So put your hand in mine, follow me, let me waste your time. Set up feet, do some stupid shit. Take a seat, let me waste your time. Solving top of tower.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lawyer's Den on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Bellavita. I'll be your moderator for today's show. And of course, today we have a very exciting guest who's going to be describing what I think is going to be one of the top cases. It'll probably reach the Supreme Court of the United States. And this deals with the tariffs. In other words, and a legality that exists. It's called Voss versus Trump, if you haven't seen it yet. But the thing is, the real question is, it's a constitutional question. Who should be in charge of tariffs? And the Supreme Court's going to make the decision. Is it an executive function or it's a legislative function? Remember, we hire these people in Congress, which is behind me, to do something. And when they don't do something, well, they're not doing their jobs. But the real question is, legally, are they the ones who are supposed to be doing the tariffs as opposed to Donald Trump? Now, in this very famous case, Voss versus Trump, today we actually have the person who drafted the complaint, and he went in front of the U.S. Court of International Trade to file it. And since then, I've noticed there's been some copycat suits, but what I hear on the streets, they're all going to be organized under this case before the U.S. International Court of U.S. International Trade. So with that, with no further ado, we're going to bring in Jeffrey Schwab, who's the lead counsel for this area, in this case, Voss versus Trump. So tell our audience, not just the United States, but around the world, on Roku, Amazon, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, we're on like a lot of distribution systems. What is this case all about? So we're going to turn the floor over to you, Jeffrey.
Well, thanks for having me, Nick. Yes, this case is actually VOS system selections. It's and that's one of our 5 plaintiffs. And we sued the Trump administration over the so-called Liberation Day tariffs, which the president justifies under an act called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. And under that act, it gives the president emergency power to regulate imports. It doesn't say actually anything about tariffs. But the president said that there is an emergency, a national emergency, because of the trade deficit, and therefore he can issue tariffs against every country in the world. And our case is about whether the president has that power.
Okay. That seems to be the real question behind this. And with us, we have another commentator out of the New York City area, Peter Bennett. Peter, I don't know if you read the complaint. And also there's been a motion filed for summary judgment and a temporary restraining order. So what are your thoughts about this, Voss versus Trump?
Well, a few different thoughts. I read parts of the case. I didn't have time to read the whole thing, but I understand the gist of it. So I always like to start with the general picture. And so I'm not addressing the legal arguments initially on the show about the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, but I would say in the broad picture of things, a few points. One, according to the Harvard Law Review, there were 6 injunctions against the Bush administration. There were 12 injunctions against President Obama, 14 against President Biden. During the first Trump administration, there were 64 injunctions. And so far, as of April 8th, the Trump administration has faced more than 120 lawsuits and 15 injunctions in February alone. one important issue in all these cases or many of these cases, and they will be decided in different directions, is whether the president and Congress who are elected will be making decisions about international policy, about the borders, about illegal immigrants, et cetera, and tariffs. The second point I would bring out, which our guest, I guess, won't like, but from my economics show, which will be on next, Wall Street Hackers, I believe that I believe tariff disputes are definitely disruptive in the short run. Absolutely. And the market was already overvalued, but this is a shock in the short run to the markets. However, we're in the long run, we are a nation, one that is bankrupt or very close to bankrupt. I mean, it sounds incredible, but our debt is $125 trillion, counting the unfunded liabilities for Medicare and Social Security. And those obligations are due in 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. And no household and no business could ever operate that way. And if we don't start getting our house in order, we are going to have a fiscal crisis and a cliff at that point. I mean, it's 7 to 9 years. It's guaranteed. They can't print enough money because it's more money than all the U.S. stocks, bonds, privately held and publicly held and commercially held real estate. So that is a huge amount of debt. So the legal arguments I'm going to hold for just a little while, and then we'll, Nick and Jeffrey, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask Jeffrey, have you received a reply yet or a response to your complaint yet? Because I haven't been able to find it.
Well, actually, yeah. So today is Tuesday, the 22nd, and just a few minutes ago, the court entered an order after the government filed a response to our motion for TRO yesterday. The court entered an order denying the temporary restraining order motion and setting a briefing schedule for the motion for preliminary injunction. The basis of the denial was that the court didn't believe that there would be irreparable harm to our plaintiffs in the short term, in the 14 days that you would normally have for a TRO. However, given the fact that the court is asking us to brief the motion for preliminary injunction, I don't think that precludes the court from finding that our clients are irreparably harmed in the longer term outside of 14 days, which I think we believe that they will be, because at some point their supply lines will be disrupted. The tariffs will require them to make decisions about whether about who their suppliers are, their customers. They may lose customers, and they may lose business relationships because companies in other countries may not want to sell to them because of the tariffs.
Okay. What is your strongest constitutional argument that says that Congress, this is the purview of Congress in terms of doing and creating tariff laws as opposed to an executive function?
So I think that, well, first of all, the Constitution says that Congress has the taxing power. Tariffs are taxes, so it logically follows that Congress has the tariff power as well. Congress has delegated some tariff power to the president, but it's put limits on that. And in this case, the president's assertion of the power is virtually unlimited. He's saying that he can declare a national emergency whenever he wants. That can't be reviewed by the judiciary for any reason that he wants, and then he can set tariffs against any country that he wants for any price or any amount that he wants, or any percentage that he wants for any reason, and then negotiate it down whenever he wants. So it's virtually unlimited authority. And so when it comes to that, there is a doctrine called the non-delegation doctrine that a lot of more of the conservative justices like. But basically, the principle is that Congress can't delegate legislative authority to the president. Now, I think even more liberal justices agree that the Congress just can't delegate all its power without any kind of limit to the president. And so even if you disagree with the non-delegation doctrine in principle, you at least agree that Congress can't just give up all of its taxing power, all of its tariff power to the president. And in this case, essentially what the president is asserting is that's what Congress has done.
Okay, can Congress turn around and give me all the power? So I'm a pretty smart guy, and I could do the tariffs. I mean, do they have the power to turn over all the tariffs to me? Is that possible?
Well, no. I mean, I think under the non-delegation doctrine, the answer would be no. There actually are some pretty interesting cases where it comes to whether Congress can delegate to a private entity regulatory powers. There's one about horse racing, I think, where Congress delegated to a private organization the regulation of like horse racing, and I think that's in the Fifth Circuit, and it might have. I think it's bouncing back and forth. I think the Fifth Circuit initially struck it down under non-delegation, though.
Okay, Peter, what's the strongest arguments for the response? In other words, the government's position. How are they going to defend this? I have a real problem. I don't know why I'm hiring all those people in Congress if they're not going to do anything. In other words, if they're not going to create laws and create bills, and they're just going to sit around and do nothing, why do we have them up there? So what's the government's position in this?
Well,
Peter? What's their
first
strong?
we look to obviously precedent in history. So this was information pulled off from Congress.gov last week on 4/16/25. And this is what Congress has to say about the history of the IEEPA and the history of what's happened for a long time. I mean, this history goes back well before the 20th century, and it's in the Congress.gov's report. So I have 6 lines maybe from that report that I pulled out. Here, I'm going to read them. First, the IEEPA, I will abbreviate that, provides the president broad authority, according to Congress, this is to regulate a variety of economic transactions. Second line, over the course of the 20th century, Congress delegated increasing amounts of emergency power to the president by statute. Presidents have used the TWEA, which is another act, but it's related to the one we're talking about now, to block international financial transactions, seize U.S.-based assets held by foreign nationals, restrict exports, modify regulations to deter the hoarding of gold, limit foreign direct investment in U.S. companies, and impose tariffs on all imports into the United States. This is history in the United States. Following committee investigation, next. And Congress, by the way, did put on increased reporting requirements years ago for the president to tell Congress what they're doing, and they have maintained that they could override his actions if they want. The fourth line is presidents have frequently used the IEEPA to restrict a variety of international transactions. IEEPA grants sweeping powers to the president to control economic transactions. Despite these broad powers, until 2023, Congress has never attempted to terminate a national emergency invoking IEEPA. So that's what Congress said on their own website. And I would add that in recent years, President Trump did tariffs, which were very beneficial, by the way, but that's an economic argument during the first administration. President Biden kept those tariffs and nobody challenged that. So for the 4 years of the Biden administration, nobody challenged that. And now, so this is a long history. And in the end, this is the only other strong argument I think is who is going to make these decisions? If Congress wants to delegate the power, I believe they should be able to, as long as they're keeping an eye on it. And they have set up a regime where the president has to report these things that I assume he is. Otherwise, that's a procedural violation. And we have discussed some smaller procedural violations. The Trump administrations have made a mistake in some of our other shows. But basically, if they report to the Congress and Congress is aware of it and maintains the power to override the tariffs, then I think the argument is pretty strong that history is on the side of the tariffs.
Response, Counselor Jeffrey.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think there's only only one president has issued tariffs under the predecessor of the IEEPA, and that's Nixon. The other was Trump. So, it's a little bit hard to say that the precedent is that Trump is allowed to issue tariffs because Trump previously issued tariffs. Under the Nixon administration, President Nixon issued tariffs because of under balance of payment issues. But subsequent to that, Congress amended the law and put restrictions on it. And what it never said in the IEPA is that Congress or that the president can issue tariffs. It doesn't say that anywhere in the act. Rather, it says that the president can regulate importations. I don't think that regulate importations means impose tariffs or impose taxes, because that would be very strange language, since we do not have a national income tax. I think the national income tax would be unconstitutional, but the Commerce Clause allows Congress to or the federal government to pass laws, or Congress to pass laws that regulate interstate commerce. So if regulate means tax, then it seems like that should apply to the Constitution. I don't think it does. So that's the first. I guess that would be the first point. The other point is, even if you agree that Congress did delegate some authority to issue tariffs under the IEPA, what the Trump administration is claiming is so broad that it seems impossible to believe that that's what Congress intended to do. The president claims that he can issue an emergency, that no court can review whether that actually is an emergency, that the emergency doesn't have to be something that has recently occurred or is temporary, since the national emergency for the Liberation Day tariffs is the trade deficit. That's basically been in existence for the last 50 years or so, my entire lifetime. Doesn't seem like something that you would consider an emergency. The other thing that the IEPA does that the previous law didn't is it includes this language that in order to issue tariffs, or not tariffs, in order to use the powers under the IEPA, there has to be an unusual and extraordinary threat coming from another country. The president says that the trade deficit is an unusual and extraordinary threat, and I propose that neither of the trade deficit is neither unusual nor extraordinary, again, for the same reason that it's existed for the last 50 years. So I think even if you agree that the IEPA could allow the president to issue tariffs, I think there are limits on that, and the limits have been exceeded by this president by issuing universal tariffs across the board at any rate the president wants, at any time, with the power to renegotiate them at any time.
Okay. My question to you, Counselor, if the executive isn't in charge of tariffs, who is in charge of tariffs?
I think it's pretty clear that Congress has the power to issue taxes, and so Congress should pass laws if they want to issue tariffs. Now, again, you might think, well, maybe Congress can delegate some of that authority in extreme circumstances, and that would be reasonable because sometimes there might be an emergency and Congress can't act soon enough. So maybe in those circumstances, it can delegate the authority to the president. But yes, ultimately, Congress holds that power.
Okay. What is your response, Mr. Bennett, please?
Nick, okay, so a few points. One, in Congress passed and this again is coming from Congress.gov, Congress passed the National Emergencies Act, NEAA, in 76 and IEEPA in 77. Quote, the pair of statutes placed new limits on presidential emergency powers. Both included reporting requirements to increase transparency and track costs, and the NEA required the president to assess annually and extend, if appropriate, an emergency. So this is Congress saying, we are going to control your emergency power. It's not unlimited. You have to report to us, and it's basically, the NEA also, one more line, also afforded Congress the means to terminate a national emergency by adopting a concurrent resolution in each chamber. So that's Congress saying, we are delegating, but we are keeping a check on you. And that is what Congress wants, not the judiciary. And that's another elected branch, which is saying, this is how much power we're willing to give you, but we're not giving you total power. The second point is, although tariffs haven't been used as frequently, it hasn't been as big an issue, I guess, economically. I don't know if it matters or not, but President Biden maintained those tariffs, and theoretically that was continuing to use it. But as I listed before, again, from the congressional website, presidents have used very similar powers, or maybe even more restrictive powers. Let's look at what they have done in history in the last 100 or 200 years. They've seized U.S.-based assets held by foreign nationals. They've restricted exports and modified regulations to deter the hoarding of gold. They've limited foreign direct investment in U.S. companies and imposed tariffs on all imports into the United States. So there's a long history of that. And then the final thing I'd address is extraordinary is hard to define, obviously legally. But from an economic standpoint, I would say the fact that the country is bordering on bankruptcy, since our assets and liabilities are equal, counting the total obligations we have is 125 trillion, not the 36 trillion they're always saying in the press and in the financial media, but because you have to count promises that are made by Medicare and Social Security that those funds are drying up quickly. And even if we didn't have a U.S. international crisis, the rest of the world, in Asia, I've looked at Europe, in South America, has promised almost free health care, and they're going to be in crisis, and that's going to generate a crisis in the United States because those countries have not put away enough for those obligations on their health side, and they have equally unfunded retirement plans. I haven't been able to fund one country who has adequately funded their retirement plans. You can't be in debt forever because ultimately you have to fulfill your obligations, and that means printing massive amounts of money if you don't solve the problem. So I would say Jeffrey mentioned 50 years of tariffs. Absolutely, but the problem is they've grown extraordinarily large since the passage of NAFTA 30 years ago, and it's out of control. You can only have so much going out each year, and yes, there are short-term damage, but this will benefit the country if we can get fairer trade terms around the world. And if tariffs are bad, then why do all the other countries do it to us? So I think that we're already seeing motion in the markets. Today, the market was up, but it's day by day. But there's talk about negotiations in Japan. And why not let the executive, with Congress's oversight, control the tariffs, and maybe the country will be better off. I think so in the coming years.
Yeah, Jeffrey, response.
A couple things. I mean, I'm not an economist, so I'm not really going to respond to the economic point, but I don't think that the tariffs really have anything to do with the national debt. I completely agree with Peter that the debt is a huge problem and that something needs to be done, or there's going to be huge consequences. I don't think that thing is to impose tariffs on imported goods from every country in the world. Second, I think that if it is such a big problem, then Congress should be the entity that acts, because that's what Congress is for. And the fact that we can see this coming, and we can see that this is going to be a problem if it is all the more reason that Congress and not the president should act. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's fair for Congress to delegate some power to the president for emergencies. Often Congress delegates power to the president when it needs to act quickly, in many situations, and this could be one of them. But not, I meant tariffs can be one of them, but not this case, because it's not anything new that we've had a national debt. Well, or it's not the trade deficit is not anything new. So I think on the whole, it makes sense for Congress to make this decision. And also in response to the previous inundations of presidential power, this power is way more broad than anything that any president has done. Imposing any kind of economic sanctions on one country or leaders of countries. Here, we've imposed a tariff on every single country in the world. And the president asserts the power to withdraw them at any time or change them at any time, renegotiate them at any time. And he's already done some of that. So, even if you think that the president could and should have some of this power, it should not be as broad as what the president is asserting in this case.
Okay. Closing statements for Peter and then Jeffrey.
One, in practical terms, Congress acting quickly might be great. Right. I think the American public knows that Congress has a history of not acting quickly. It's government by committee. And many times committees take a long time to make decisions. And countries around the world have had VAT taxes that are unfair and tariffs that are unfair. And it is draining money out of our system and hurting the U.S. manufacturing. The U.S. has lost 90,000 manufacturing plants, not jobs, plants, since NAFTA has been created. It has decimated the heartland of America. And we need to make our own drugs. We need to make our own ships. We need to make our own, we need to reinvigorate our new rare earth mineral supplies. We cannot be dependent on other countries for these things. This is an emergency and that's why it's such a short-term disruption, because this should have been handled 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. And even those who are criticizing the president now for his actions, we're saying 10 years ago, 20 years ago, members of Congress, which is perfect for this point, Senator Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, 10 and 20 years ago, were saying we need to do something about this. Congress acting quickly? I don't think so. In practicality, we need to have this power delegated, hopefully in the next 30, 60, 90 days. I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot of trade deals. Over 120 countries are lined up. And if the process is allowed to lay out and the courts stay out of it, and I think ultimately they will, then I think in the end, the country will be stronger for it, and Congress won't have to act quickly.
Closing statements, Jeffrey.
Well, yeah, I think that part of the point is here that Congress should be the one that acts. And if Congress is just going to delegate its authority and avoid any kind of responsibility for its actions, I think that's what Congress has been doing for a long time. And that's a problem. That only increases Congress's irresponsibility, and I think has led to the national deficit that we have financially with the government. But just on the point of, even if you agree with Peter about the consequences of some of these things, it doesn't make sense to issue across the board tariffs. Take one of my clients, VOS Selections, the lead plaintiff. VOS Selections imports wines and spirits from a whole host of countries across the world. I think 5 continents. But as anybody knows who is familiar with wine, wine's different depending on where it comes from, based on a variety of geographic factors. So a Napa Valley wine is not the same as a Bordeaux wine. So putting tariffs on Bordeaux wine makes no sense. It's not going to create any jobs in the United States. It's only going to hurt my client and his company and other people who want to enjoy Bordeaux wine. And that's okay. I mean, that should be allowed to happen. It's not hurting anybody. If there were an emergency and the issue was that we need to stop, reciprocal tariffs or the VAT, you could issue specific targeted tariffs to address that. And that's not what the president's done. Instead, he's asserted the broad authority to issue across the board universal tariffs on almost every country in the world for any reason that he wants, at any rate that he wants, with the ability to renegotiate at any time. That's a very, very broad power, and that is across that falls on the wrong side of the line, and therefore we think that the court should intervene and say that this has gone too far.
Right. And with that, we want to thank Jeffrey Schwab, who's lead counsel for this great suit. I think we're looking forward to seeing how this progresses through the court system, and I want to thank our audience in the United States and our audience from around the world for listening to Lawyers Den, a very important suit, Voss versus Trump. And we'll be talking to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
I can feel my body hold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, look at me deceiving, let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy.